The fine showed up in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, stuffed between a grocery store circular and my electric bill, and I almost threw it away without reading it. But something about the official letterhead of the Pine Ridge Mountain Estates Homeowners Association caught my eye, and when I opened it, I found myself staring at a $250 penalty for unsightly and dangerous ice formations on my cabin. I stood there in my kitchen in Estes Park, Colorado, coffee cup halfway to my lips, reading the citation 3 times to make sure I was understanding it correctly. According to the letter, signed by one Patricia Henderson, HOA president, I was in violation of Section 12.4 of the community bylaws, which stated that homeowners must maintain their properties in a manner that does not create visual blight or safety hazards. The icicles hanging from my roof apparently qualified as both. My name is Frank Owens, and I have lived in this cabin for 7 years. I bought it after my divorce, looking for peace and quiet in the mountains. Pine Ridge Mountain Estates seemed perfect at the time. The development consisted of about 60 homes spread across a beautiful valley outside Estes Park, with genuine rustic cabins mixed with newer construction. When I purchased my place, the HOA seemed reasonable enough. They mowed the common areas, plowed the main roads, and mostly left everyone alone. That changed about 18 months ago when Patricia Henderson moved into the neighborhood and immediately ran for HOA president. She won by default because nobody else wanted the job, and she had been making our lives miserable ever since. But fining someone for icicles, in Colorado, in February, that was a new level of ridiculous. I pulled out my phone and called my neighbor, Gary Mitchell, who lived 3 houses down. Gary was retired from the construction business and had become a good friend since I moved in. "You get a fine too?" Gary asked before I even said hello. "For icicles," I said. "Please tell me you are joking about getting one too. Mine is for firewood stacked too close to my house." Apparently, it is unsightly. I have been stacking wood in the exact same spot for 12 years, but now it is suddenly a problem. I sat down at my kitchen table, looking out the window at the icicles in question. They were hanging from my north-facing eave, maybe 2 feet long, created by the natural freeze-thaw cycle that happened every winter in the mountains. Every cabin in the neighborhood had them. Hell, Patricia's house probably had them too. "This is insane," I said. "What are we supposed to do about it? Pay the fine or fight it, I guess. There is a hearing next Tuesday if you want to contest it. But between you and me, I heard Patricia already told someone that anyone who contests their fine gets added to her watch list." "Her watch list?" "Yeah, apparently she drives around taking photos of properties, looking for violations. Someone contested a fine last month for having their trash cans visible from the street, and now she is citing them for every little thing she can find." After I hung up with Gary, I spent the next hour reading through the entire HOA bylaws document. It was 47 pages of dense legal language, most of which seemed designed to give the board maximum authority to fine residents for anything they deemed inappropriate. Section 12.4 was particularly vague, using terms like unsightly and harmonious with the mountain aesthetic without defining what those actually meant. But as I read through the document, something started bothering me. I have worked as a civil engineer for 20 years, specializing in municipal infrastructure and building codes. It is not glamorous work, but it has made me very familiar with construction regulations, zoning laws, and the legal requirements for residential developments. And as I read the Pine Ridge bylaws, I noticed several references to all homes meeting or exceeding International Building Code standards and full compliance with Larimer County building regulations. That phrase stuck in my head. Full compliance. I thought about the neighborhood, about the various homes and how the development had grown over the years. Pine Ridge had been developed in phases, starting in the early 2000s. The original cabins, like mine, were built by a developer who went bankrupt during the 2008 recession. After that, the remaining lots were sold off individually, and people built custom homes. I pulled up the Larimer County Building Code database on my laptop. As a licensed engineer, I had access to various public records and technical documents. I started searching for the original site plans and building permits for Pine Ridge Mountain Estates. What I found was interesting. Very interesting. The development had been approved with specific conditions related to slope stability, drainage, and setback requirements because of the mountainous terrain. Many of the lots sat on significant slopes, which required special foundation work and drainage systems. The county had been very particular about these requirements, especially after a subdivision near Boulder had experienced a mudslide in the late 1990s. I spent the rest of the day going down a rabbit hole of public records, building permits, and site photos. By evening, I had filled a legal pad with notes and had a growing suspicion that something was not right with several properties in Pine Ridge. But I needed to see things in person to be sure. The next morning, I grabbed my camera and my old surveying equipment and took a walk through the neighborhood. It was a cold February day, clear and bright, with snow covering everything. I tried to look casual, like I was just out for some exercise, but I was actually conducting a preliminary survey. The first thing I noticed was Patricia Henderson's house. It was one of the newer builds, completed about 3 years ago. It was a large 2-story structure with a 3-car garage, much bigger than most of the other homes. The house sat on Lot 32, which according to the original site plan, was on a significant slope requiring a minimum setback of 50 feet from the rear property line because of drainage concerns. I walked along the common area behind her property, staying on public ground. From there, I could see that her house extended much closer to the rear line than 50 feet. I took several photos and made notes of the approximate distances. Over the next few hours, I walked through the entire subdivision. I documented Patricia's house, along with several others that looked suspicious. The vice president of the HOA, a woman named Cheryl Wright, had built an addition to her garage that appeared to violate the side yard setback requirements. The treasurer, Michael Thompson, had recently constructed a large deck that seemed to extend beyond the building envelope allowed on his particular lot. But the most interesting discovery was the community clubhouse. Pine Ridge had a small clubhouse near the entrance, used for HOA meetings and social events. It had been built about 5 years ago, funded by a special assessment that everyone had to pay. According to the meeting minutes I found in the HOA archives online, the clubhouse had cost nearly $200,000 to construct. As I stood looking at the clubhouse, something Gary had mentioned months ago came back to me. He had complained about how expensive the clubhouse project had been, especially since it was such a simple structure. Just a big room with a kitchen and bathrooms. Gary, with his construction background, had estimated it should have cost half what they paid. I walked around the building, examining it carefully. The foundation looked wrong. Even under the snow, I could see signs that it was settling unevenly. There were small cracks in the concrete pad, and one corner of the building sat noticeably lower than the others. I pulled out my phone and called the Larimer County Building Department. "Hi, this is Frank Owens. I am a resident of Pine Ridge Mountain Estates in Estes Park. I am trying to locate the building permits and final inspection reports for our community clubhouse. Can you help me with that?" The clerk was helpful. After about 10 minutes on hold, she came back with interesting news. "I am showing an initial permit application from 5 years ago, but it was never finalized. There is no record of final inspection or certificate of occupancy for that structure." "What does that mean exactly?" "It means if the building exists and is being used, it is technically an unpermitted structure. That is a pretty serious violation." I thanked her and ended the call, my mind racing. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my cabin, organizing my findings and cross-referencing everything with county records. The more I dug, the worse it looked. Patricia's house was built at least 15 feet too close to the rear property line. Cheryl's garage addition was unpermitted. Michael's deck was constructed without proper inspections. And the clubhouse, which everyone had paid for through special assessments, was operating without a certificate of occupancy. The HOA board members, who were so eager to fine everyone else for minor issues, had collectively violated building codes and permit requirements on at least 4 major structures. And given the cost overrun on the clubhouse project, I was beginning to suspect there might be financial irregularities as well. On Monday morning, I requested copies of all HOA financial records for the past 5 years. Under Colorado's HOA laws, homeowners have the right to inspect these documents. I submitted my request by certified mail, making sure to follow all the proper procedures. That afternoon, my phone rang. It was Patricia Henderson. "Mr. Owens, I received your records request." "May I ask what this is about?" Her voice was tight, controlled. Patricia was in her early 50s, with short blonde hair and the kind of aggressive personality that made every conversation feel like a confrontation. I had dealt with her before over minor issues, and it never went well. "Just exercising my rights as a homeowner," I said pleasantly. "I want to review some financial information. This is very unusual. Most homeowners do not need to see detailed financial records. Most homeowners do not get fined for icicles either, but here we are." There was a long pause. "I see. You are upset about the citation. Mr. Owens, the rules apply to everyone equally. Those icicles are a safety hazard. What if they fell on someone? Patricia, this is Colorado, in February. Every house in the neighborhood has icicles. Are you planning to fine everyone? The board has determined that your property has an excessive accumulation of ice formations. Other homeowners have taken appropriate measures to prevent them." "What measures? What exactly am I supposed to do?" "That is not my concern. You need to comply with the bylaws. The fine stands unless you want to contest it at the hearing on Tuesday. In the meantime, I will have the financial records prepared for your review. You can pick them up at my house on Wednesday." She hung up before I could respond. The hearing on Tuesday evening was held in the unpermitted clubhouse, which I found darkly ironic. About 15 homeowners showed up, most of them there to contest various fines. Patricia sat at the front table with Cheryl and Michael, looking like a judge preparing to hand down sentences. I was the 4th person called to present my case. I stood up and walked to the front, carrying a folder with my documentation. "Mr. Owens," Patricia said, looking at me over her reading glasses, "you were cited for ice formations on your property. Do you have evidence that this citation was issued in error?" "I do, actually. I have photos showing that 23 other properties in this neighborhood currently have similar or larger icicle formations. I am wondering why I was specifically targeted when this is a completely normal occurrence for any house in Colorado during winter." Patricia's expression did not change. "The board has discretion in enforcement. We cannot monitor every property simultaneously." Your property was observed and found to be in violation. So you admit that you are selectively enforcing the rules. We are prioritizing the most egregious violations. The most egregious. I pulled out a photo of my cabin. The icicles were maybe 2 feet long, hanging from one section of roof. Patricia, your own house has icicles right now. I took this photo this morning. I held up another picture showing her house with similar ice formations. There was a murmur from the other homeowners in the room. Patricia's face reddened. My property is not under discussion here, and I find it very concerning that you are photographing my home. I photographed it from the street, which is public property, just like you photographed my cabin from the street to issue this citation. The fine stands, Patricia said sharply. You have 14 days to pay or we will place a lien on your property. Next case. I started to argue, but Gary caught my eye from the audience and shook his head slightly. I walked back to my seat, angry but also newly motivated. If Patricia wanted to play hardball, I was more than ready. On Wednesday, I went to Patricia's house to collect the financial records. She handed me 3 large binders without inviting me inside. These are copies, she said. You have 1 week to review them, then I need them back. Actually, under Colorado law, I can keep copies of HOA records, but thank you for these. I spent the next several days going through every page. The financial records were a mess, not obviously fraudulent at first glance, but full of irregularities. Large cash payments to vendors I could not find any information about. Invoices that seemed inflated. And the clubhouse construction stood out dramatically. The total cost had been $197,000, paid to a construction company called Mountain Vista Builders. I searched for Mountain Vista online and could not find any current business listing. I checked with the Colorado Secretary of State and found that the company had been registered 5 years ago, operated for about 6 months, then dissolved. The registered agent for Mountain Vista Builders was listed as Patricia Henderson. I sat back in my chair, staring at that name on my computer screen. Patricia had owned the construction company that built the clubhouse. She had essentially paid herself almost $200,000 of HOA money to construct a building that was never properly permitted or inspected. This was not just a building code violation anymore. This was fraud. I needed more information before I made any accusations. The next morning, I drove to the county offices in Fort Collins and spent several hours digging through public records. I found the original permit application for the clubhouse, which listed Mountain Vista as the contractor. But the permit had been denied because the proposed foundation design was insufficient for the soil conditions on that lot. The county geotechnical report, which I had to request through a public records request, indicated that the clubhouse lot had significant clay content in the soil and required either a deeper foundation or soil stabilization. The estimated additional cost for proper foundation work would have been about $30,000. Apparently, Patricia had decided not to bother with that expense, or with getting the permit approved, or with any inspections. She had just built the clubhouse, collected the money from the HOA, and hoped nobody would notice. I drove back to Estes Park, my mind working through the implications. I now had evidence of fraud, building code violations by multiple board members, and selective enforcement of HOA rules. But I needed to figure out the best way to use this information. That evening, Gary came over for a beer. I showed him what I had found. "Holy hell," he said, looking through my documentation. Patricia basically stole $200,000 from the HOA and built an illegal structure with it. And now she is fining people for icicles while her own house violates setback requirements. Gary shook his head. So what are you going to do? Report her to the county? I am thinking bigger than that. I want to expose all of it. The fraud, the code violations, everything. But I need to do it right. You are going to make some serious enemies. I already have enemies. Patricia is trying to find me for Icicles, Gary. Icicles. He laughed despite the situation. Fair point. What do you need from me? Your expertise. I need someone with construction knowledge to verify my findings on the building code violations. If I am going to accuse the entire HOA board of illegal construction, I need to be absolutely certain I am right. Over the next week, Gary and I conducted a thorough investigation of every property owned by HOA board members. We measured setbacks, checked foundation work, examined permits. We documented everything with photos, measurements, and cross-references to the relevant building codes. Patricia Henderson's house, built 15 feet beyond the required rear setback, which violated both HOA bylaws and county zoning regulations. The violation was significant because it placed the structure too close to a drainage easement, potentially causing water flow problems for downhill properties. Cheryl Wright's garage addition, constructed without any permit whatsoever. The addition was 12 by 24 feet, well over the square footage that could be claimed as a minor renovation. It should have required a full building permit, foundation inspection, and electrical inspection. Michael Thompson's deck, built without proper footings. Gary examined it closely and determined that the support posts were just sitting on concrete blocks rather than being properly anchored. In an area prone to high winds and heavy snow, this was genuinely dangerous. And the clubhouse, unpermitted, uninspected, and settling into the ground because of an inadequate foundation. Gary estimated that within a few years, the building would experience serious structural problems. In total, we documented code violations representing over $400,000 in improper construction, along with the fraud associated with the clubhouse project. On a Saturday morning, I organized a meeting at my cabin. I invited every homeowner in Pine Ridge who had received a fine in the past 6 months. 17 people showed up, crowding into my living room. I stood by my fireplace and laid it out for them. I showed them the photos, the building permits or lack thereof, the financial records showing Patricia's company. I explained the fraud and the code violations in clear terms. "So what you are saying," said Jennifer Sanders, a retired teacher who had been fined for leaving her garden hose visible, "is that Patricia has been stealing from us while violating the same rules she is trying to enforce." That is exactly what I am saying. And I have documented proof of all of it. What do we do about it? Asked Tom Richardson, a software developer who had been fined for parking his truck in his own driveway. We file complaints with Larimer County Building Department. We report the fraud to the district attorney. And we call for a special meeting to remove the entire board. Patricia will fight this, Gary warned. She is not going to just step down quietly. I am counting on it, I said, because the more attention this gets, the harder it will be for her to sweep it under the rug. The group agreed to move forward. We divided up the tasks. Some people would file building code complaints. Others would gather more financial documentation. I volunteered to prepare the formal complaint to the district attorney's office. On Monday morning, I submitted a detailed complaint to the Larimer County Building Department, complete with photos, measurements, and specific code citations. I named every property with violations, including Patricia's, Cheryl's, and Michael's. I also notified them about the unpermitted clubhouse and included the geotechnical report showing why the foundation was inadequate. The county inspector, a man named David Foster, called me that afternoon. Mr. Owens, I have to say, this is one of the most thoroughly documented complaints I have ever received. You have an engineering background. Civil engineer, yes. I work in municipal infrastructure. That explains it. This is very serious. If what you are alleging is accurate, we have multiple violations, including some that affect public safety. I will need to schedule site inspections. How long does that usually take? Given the scope of this and the safety concerns, I will be out there this week. Probably Wednesday or Thursday. I also filed a formal complaint with the Colorado District Attorney's Office in Fort Collins, detailing the financial fraud associated with the clubhouse construction. I included copies of the HOA financial records, the company registration showing Patricia as the agent, and my analysis of the inflated costs. Then, I drafted a petition calling for a special HOA meeting to recall the board. Under Colorado HOA law, 20% of homeowners could demand a special meeting. With 60 homes in Pine Ridge, I needed 12 signatures. I had 17 homeowners who were already on board, so getting the signatures was easy. I hand-delivered the petition to Patricia on Tuesday evening. She opened the door with a smile that died as soon as she saw me. "What is this?" she asked, looking at the document. "A petition for a special meeting. We are calling for a vote to remove the board." Patricia's face went through several interesting color changes. "On what grounds?" "Financial mismanagement and selective enforcement of bylaws. It is all detailed in the petition. Under the bylaws, you have 7 days to schedule the meeting. This is ridiculous. You are just upset about your fine." "Actually, I paid the fine. I paid it yesterday." "This is not about Icicles anymore, Patricia. This is about how you have been running this HOA. The board has full authority to manage this community. A few disgruntled homeowners do not get to overrule that. We will see what the full membership thinks. You have 7 days to schedule the meeting. If you do not, we can schedule it ourselves and it will be even worse for you." I walked away, leaving her standing in her doorway holding the petition. The next morning, I got a call from David Foster at the building department. "Mr. Owens, I conducted inspections yesterday and this morning. I wanted to give you a heads up that I will be issuing stop-use orders on several properties, including the community clubhouse." Stop-use orders. The clubhouse foundation is worse than I expected. There is active settling and structural movement. The building is unsafe for occupation until it is either properly repaired or demolished. I am also issuing violation notices for the other properties you documented. The Henderson property is particularly problematic because it is affecting drainage patterns. I have already observed water pooling in areas where it should not be. What happens now? The property owners will receive their notices. They have the right to appeal, but based on what I saw, these violations are clear-cut. They will need to either correct the violations or potentially face court action. In the case of the Henderson property, correction might mean removing part of the structure to bring it into compliance with setback requirements. I thanked him and ended the call, feeling a grim satisfaction. This was really happening. That afternoon, Patricia called me. Her voice was shaking with anger. "You reported us to the county. You filed building code complaints." I reported code violations, yes, just like you reported me for Icicles. That is completely different. You cost us thousands of dollars in potential fines and repairs. Then you should have built your structures legally. Patricia, you have been so focused on fining everyone for minor aesthetic issues that you miss the fact that you and your entire board are operating illegal structures, and that is not even getting into the fraud. What fraud? How dare you accuse me of fraud, Mountain Vista Builders, the company you own that built the clubhouse? The company that charged the HOA almost $200,000 for a structure that was never properly permitted and is now actively failing. That fraud. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I do not know what you think you found, but you are way out of line. I am going to talk to my lawyer about suing you for defamation. Go ahead. Everything I reported is documented and provable. You can sue me, but that will just bring more attention to what you have been doing. The special meeting is scheduled for next Saturday at 2 p.m., by the way. I am sure you got the notice. She hung up without responding. The next few days were chaotic. The building department posted a red tag on the clubhouse, prohibiting its use until the foundation issues were addressed. Patricia, Cheryl, and Michael all received official violation notices for their properties. Word spread through the neighborhood quickly, and suddenly everyone was talking about the scandal. I got calls from several homeowners thanking me. I also got a few angry calls from people who thought I was causing trouble and should have just paid my fine and moved on. But the majority opinion seemed to be shifting against Patricia and her board. On Friday, 2 days before the special meeting, I received a certified letter from Patricia's attorney. It was a cease and desist letter, demanding that I stop spreading false and defamatory statements about Patricia and the HOA board. It threatened legal action if I continued. I called my own attorney, a woman named Karen Sullivan, who specialized in HOA disputes. Yes, her name was actually Karen, which she found endlessly amusing given her line of work. "This letter is garbage," she said after reviewing it. "Everything you have reported is true and documented. They are just trying to scare you into backing down. Ignore it. Can they actually sue me?" "They can file a lawsuit, sure. Anyone can file a lawsuit, but they would lose badly and they probably know it. This is intimidation, nothing more. How are you feeling about the special meeting?" "Nervous. I have never done anything like this before." "You will be fine. You have the facts on your side. Just present them clearly and let the homeowners decide. And Frank, you might want to prepare for things to get worse before they get better. People who engage in this kind of financial misconduct do not usually go quietly." She was right about that. On Saturday morning, the day of the special meeting, I woke up to find my mailbox had been vandalized. Someone had spray-painted "snitch" across it in red paint. They had also scattered garbage across my front yard. I took photos and filed a police report, but I knew it was unlikely they would catch whoever did it. The message was clear, though. Someone was trying to intimidate me. The special meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m., and since the clubhouse was red-tagged, we had to hold it at the Estes Park Community Center. I arrived early to help set up chairs. By 1:30, homeowners were already arriving. By 2, the room was packed. It looked like almost every household in Pine Ridge had sent at least one representative. Patricia sat in the front row with Cheryl and Michael, all three of them looking grim and angry. Patricia's attorney sat next to her, a severe-looking man in an expensive suit. I had been elected to moderate the meeting since I had organized the petition. I stood at the front of the room, my heart pounding, and called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming. This special meeting has been called to address concerns about the management of our HOA and to vote on whether to recall the current board. I am going to present the facts as I understand them, and then we will open the floor for discussion before voting." For the next 30 minutes, I laid out everything. I showed photos of the code violations. I explained the financial irregularities with the clubhouse construction. I presented the timeline of Patricia forming Mountain Vista Builders, the company receiving HOA money, and the company dissolving shortly after. I explained how the clubhouse was built without proper permits and was now structurally unsound. Then, I showed the selective enforcement of HOA rules. How Patricia and her board had issued over 40 fines in the past year for minor issues like icicles and visible garden hoses, while they themselves operated multiple illegal structures. The building department has confirmed all of these violations, I said. The clubhouse is currently under a stop-use order. Patricia Henderson's house violates setback requirements. Cheryl Wright's garage addition is unpermitted. Michael Thompson's deck is unsafe. These are facts, not opinions. Patricia's attorney stood up. I object to these proceedings. This is clearly a personal vendetta by Mr. Owens, who is upset about a legitimate fine. None of the allegations he has made have been proven in any court of law. They have been confirmed by Larimer County Building Department, I said. Would you like to see the official violation notices? That is not the same as a legal judgment. My client denies any wrongdoing. A homeowner in the back stood up. It was Tom Richardson, the software developer. I do not care about legal technicalities. I care that Patricia spent our money building an illegal clubhouse using her own company. That looks like theft to me. Several other homeowners voiced agreement. Patricia stood up, her face red. How dare you accuse me of theft? I have volunteered countless hours to manage this community. That clubhouse was built at a fair market price. Then why was it built by a company you owned? Someone asked. It was the most competitive bid. Everything was done properly. Except for getting permits, I said, or passing inspections, or using an adequate foundation. Patricia, the building is sinking into the ground. The county inspector said it might have to be demolished. That is not my fault. The contractor is responsible for that. You were the contractor. You owned Mountain Vista Builders. Patricia's attorney whispered something to her urgently. She sat down, her jaw clenched. Gary stood up from his seat. I worked in construction for 30 years. I have examined that clubhouse foundation. It is completely inadequate for the soil conditions. Any competent contractor would have known that. Either Patricia did not know what she was doing, which means she was not qualified to build it, or she knew and cut corners to save money while charging us full price. Either way, it is fraud. The room erupted in conversation. People were angry, talking over each other. I had to call for order several times. Jennifer Sanders, the retired teacher, stood up. I want to hear from Patricia directly. Did you own the company that built the clubhouse? Patricia's attorney tried to stop her from answering, but she waved him off. Yes, I owned Mountain Vista Builders. But there was nothing improper about it. I disclosed my interest to the board before bidding. You disclosed it to yourself, someone asked. You were the board president. The other board members knew. Cheryl and Michael both looked uncomfortable. Cheryl spoke up. Patricia told us she had construction experience and could save us money by managing the project herself. We thought it was a good idea at the time. Did you know the building was being constructed without permits? I asked. No, Cheryl said firmly. I had no idea about that. Patricia said she was handling all the permitting. Michael nodded in agreement. Same here. I trusted Patricia to do it right. Now Patricia was isolated. Even her own board members were distancing themselves from her. Her attorney was frantically writing notes and whispering to her. I call for a vote, Tom Richardson said. Let us vote to remove the board and install a temporary management committee until we can hold proper elections. The motion was seconded. Patricia's attorney objected again, claiming the procedures were not being followed correctly, but he was overruled. I called for a show of hands. The vote was not even close. Out of 53 homeowners present, 47 voted to remove the board. Only 6 voted against, and I suspected most of those were friends or allies of Patricia. The board was officially removed from power. We then voted on a temporary management committee consisting of Gary Mitchell, Jennifer Sanders, and Tom Richardson. They would oversee HOA operations until we could hold proper elections in 60 days. As the meeting broke up, Patricia stormed out, her attorney trailing behind her. She shot me a look of pure hatred as she passed, but she did not say anything. I felt relieved but also anxious. This was not over yet. The following week, things moved quickly. The new management committee hired an independent forensic accountant to review the HOA finances. Within 3 days, the accountant confirmed what I had suspected. Patricia had systematically overcharged the HOA for the clubhouse construction, billing for work that was never done and materials that were never purchased. The actual construction cost was probably around $80,000. She had pocketed the difference, roughly $117,000. The management committee filed a formal complaint with the Larimer County District Attorney's Office. I provided all my documentation to support the complaint. Meanwhile, the building department was moving forward with enforcement actions. Patricia received a formal order to either remove the portion of her house that violated the setback requirements or apply for a variance. Given the drainage issues her house was causing, a variance was unlikely to be approved. She was looking at having to demolish part of her own home. Cheryl and Michael were more cooperative. Cheryl agreed to obtain a permit for her garage addition and bring it up to code. Michael started the process of properly rebuilding his deck with correct footings and permits. The clubhouse was the biggest problem. The temporary management committee obtained several estimates for either repairing the foundation or demolishing the structure and building a new one. Repair was not feasible. The building would have to be torn down. The estimated cost for demolition and construction of a new, properly permitted clubhouse was about $150,000. The HOA did not have that kind of money in reserve. Patricia had spent it. The committee decided to file a civil lawsuit against Patricia to recover the funds she had taken. It would be a long legal process, but it was necessary. 2 weeks after the special meeting, the district attorney's office announced that Patricia Henderson was being charged with theft, fraud, and forgery. The forgery charge related to building department documents that had been altered. Apparently, Patricia had submitted a fake final inspection report to the HOA board years ago, claiming the clubhouse had passed inspection when no inspection had ever occurred. The story made the local news. Local HOA president charged with fraud ran in the Estes Park newspaper. The Denver news stations picked it up too. Suddenly, everyone in the area was talking about the scandal at Pine Ridge Mountain Estates. I got calls from reporters asking for interviews. I declined most of them, but I did agree to speak with one reporter from the Denver Post who was doing a larger story on HOA fraud in Colorado. "What made you start investigating?" she asked during our phone interview. "Honestly, I got fined for Icicles. It was such a ridiculous citation that it made me wonder what else the board was doing wrong. I never expected to find fraud and code violations on this scale. What would you say to other homeowners dealing with aggressive HOA boards? Document everything. Know your rights. And do not be afraid to ask questions when something does not seem right. HOAs have a lot of power, but they are not above the law. If board members are violating codes or misusing funds, there are ways to hold them accountable." The article ran 2 weeks later with the headline, "How One Engineer Brought Down a Corrupt HOA." It was embarrassing seeing myself portrayed as some kind of hero, but the article did a good job explaining the broader issues with HOA oversight in Colorado. Patricia's criminal case moved through the system slowly. Her attorney tried various delay tactics, but the evidence was overwhelming. In late May, she accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of theft and 1 count of fraud. The other charges were dropped. She was sentenced to 2 years in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $117,000 to the Pine Ridge HOA. The civil lawsuit was still pending, but the criminal conviction made it much more likely we would eventually recover the money. Cheryl Wright ended up being okay. She completed the permitting process for her garage and paid the fines. The county allowed her to keep the structure since the violations were relatively minor and easily corrected. Michael Thompson rebuilt his deck properly. It took him most of the summer, but he did it right this time with correct footings and all the required inspections. The clubhouse was demolished in June. It was surreal watching the building come down, knowing how much money had been wasted on it. The HOA decided not to rebuild immediately. Instead, we would save up the funds over the next few years and do it right when we had the resources. In July, Pine Ridge held elections for a new permanent board. Gary was elected president. Jennifer became vice president. Tom Richardson became treasurer. I was asked to run for a position, but I declined. I had done my part. I just wanted to go back to living quietly in my cabin. The new board immediately revised the HOA bylaws. We removed many of the vague aesthetic requirements that Patricia had used to harass homeowners. We established clear procedures for enforcement that required consistency. No more selective citations. If something was genuinely a code violation or safety hazard, it would be enforced. But icicles in winter, garden hoses, those were no longer HOA concerns. We also implemented financial controls to prevent future fraud. All contracts over $5,000 now required bids from at least 3 contractors. No board member could have a financial interest in any company doing business with the HOA. Financial records would be published quarterly for all homeowners to review. By August, life in Pine Ridge was starting to feel normal again. The neighborhood was actually becoming more friendly. People who had been afraid to talk to each other, because Patricia might cite them for having too long of a conversation in their driveways, were now organizing block parties and social events. One evening in late August, I was sitting on my front porch watching the sunset when Gary walked over with 2 beers. "Thought you might want some company," he said, handing me one. "Always. How is the board treating you? It is work, but it is rewarding. We are actually helping people instead of harassing them. Novel concept. How are the finances looking? Better than expected. We cut a lot of unnecessary expenses that Patricia had built into the budget. Turns out we do not need to pay someone $300 a month to drive around looking for violations. We are actually running a surplus. We should have enough saved for a new clubhouse in about 3 years, maybe less if Patricia actually pays the restitution. Think she will." Eventually, she sold her house to pay legal fees. She is required to make payments as part of her probation. If she does not, she goes back to jail. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "You know what is funny?" Gary said, "If Patricia had just left you alone about those icicles, she would have gotten away with all of it. Nobody was asking questions until she pushed you too far." I have thought about that. She was so focused on controlling every little thing that she got sloppy about the big things. Or maybe she just thought she was untouchable. Pride comes before the fall, I guess. Though I got to say, Frank, you are probably the last person she should have messed with. An engineer with time on his hands and a gift for documentation. That is like the worst-case scenario for someone running a scam. I laughed. I did not set out to take her down. I just wanted to understand why I was being fined for something that made no sense. And you ended up uncovering fraud, code violations, and financial mismanagement. Not bad for a guy who just wanted to be left alone. Still want to be left alone, for the record. Fair enough. Though you are kind of a legend in the neighborhood now. You are the guy who stood up to the tyrant HOA president and won. I liked it better when I was just the quiet engineer in cabin 12. Too late for that now. You are stuck with us. The next few months were peaceful. Winter came again, and with it, icicles on every cabin in Pine Ridge. But this time, nobody got fined for them. The new board focused on actual problems like snow removal and road maintenance. Patricia went to prison in September. I felt no satisfaction seeing her led away in handcuffs in the news footage. It was just sad. She had been given authority and trust, and she had abused both. She had hurt people and stolen money, and now she was paying the price. But there was no joy in it. The thing that stuck with me most was how easily it could have continued. If she had not gotten greedy with the fines, if she had not targeted me specifically, if she had just been a little less aggressive, she might have gotten away with it indefinitely. HOAs operate with very little oversight. Most homeowners do not have the time or expertise to question the board's decisions. I thought about all the other HOAs out there, all the other Patricia Hendersons wielding power without accountability. How many of them were engaging in similar misconduct? How many homeowners were being bullied into paying unjust fines or funding questionable projects? It made me understand why my attorney, Karen Sullivan, had specialized in HOA disputes. There was a real need for people who understood the system and could fight back when it became corrupted. In October, the neighborhood held a fall festival in the common area near where the clubhouse used to stand. There were food trucks and games for kids, and a band playing country music. It was the most community spirit I had seen in Pine Ridge since I moved in. Jennifer Sanders found me near the food trucks and gave me a hug. "This is because of you," she said. "All of this, people feeling comfortable gathering again, not being afraid of getting fined for enjoying their own neighborhood. I just asked questions. Everyone else did the real work." "You did more than ask questions, Frank. You held people accountable. That takes courage." Maybe she was right. It had taken courage, especially when Patricia's attorney was sending threatening letters and someone was vandalizing my mailbox. But it had been worth it. By the time winter settled in fully again, Pine Ridge felt like a completely different place. The old fear and tension were gone. People waved to each other. They helped with snow removal without being asked. They actually seemed to enjoy living here. I sat in my cabin one evening in December, almost exactly a year after receiving that first ridiculous fine, and reflected on everything that had happened. An icicle citation had led to uncovering fraud, removing a corrupt board, and ultimately improving life for everyone in the neighborhood. The icicles hanging from my eaves sparkled in the moonlight. They were beautiful, I realized, just a natural part of winter in the Colorado mountains. There was no reason to fear them or cite people for them. They were simply ice formations, harmless and temporary, melting away when spring came. I poured myself a whiskey and raised the glass toward the window. "To icicles," I said to my empty cabin, "and to asking questions when things do not make sense." My phone buzzed. It was a text from Gary. "Board meeting next week. We need to approve the budget for next year. Want to sit in?" I smiled and texted back, "Only if you promise no fines for icicles. Deal. Though I am thinking about citing you for that ugly porch furniture. Those are vintage camping chairs. They are rustic. They are rusty. There is a difference." I laughed and set down my phone. Life in Pine Ridge was good again. The corruption had been rooted out. The criminals had been punished. The neighborhood was healing, and all because someone had decided to fine me for icicles. Sometimes the smallest injustices lead to the biggest revelations. Sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone. And sometimes, the people who seem most powerful are actually the most vulnerable to scrutiny. Patricia Henderson had ruled Pine Ridge with an iron fist, using fear and fines to control everyone. But her power had been built on a foundation as unstable as the clubhouse she had fraudulently constructed. All it took was one person willing to look closely, to ask questions, to document the truth. The legal system had worked, mostly. Patricia was in prison. The HOA had new leadership. The neighborhood was recovering. It was not a perfect ending, there never really is, but it was justice. As spring approached and the icicles finally melted away for good, I found myself thinking about what I had learned, about power and accountability, about community and courage, about the importance of speaking up when something is wrong, even when it is easier to just pay the fine and move on. I had paid the fine, actually. That $250 for icicles. But I had not moved on, and that had made all the difference. The restitution money started coming in slowly. Patricia was making payments from prison wages, tiny amounts that would take decades to fully repay what she had stolen. But the HOA also seized and sold her house, which provided a significant chunk of the money back. Between that and the insurance settlement from the bonding company that had insured the board, we actually recovered most of the losses. By the end of my first full year after the scandal broke, Pine Ridge had enough money saved to start planning the new clubhouse. This time, we did it right. Multiple bids from legitimate contractors, proper permits, county inspections at every stage. The process was slower and required more oversight, but everyone felt confident it was being done correctly. I occasionally still got recognized around Estes Park as that guy who took down the HOA president. It was embarrassing, but most people just wanted to thank me or tell me their own HOA horror stories. I listened politely and offered advice when I could. The forensic accountant who reviewed the HOA books ended up finding even more irregularities beyond the clubhouse fraud. Patricia had been skimming small amounts from various budget categories for years. Nothing huge, but it added up. She had stolen probably close to $150,000 total over her time as president. The additional findings led to more charges and a longer probation period. Looking back, what struck me most was how simple it had all been to uncover once I started looking. The evidence was sitting in public records, in county databases, in the HOA's own financial documents. Patricia had not been particularly clever about hiding her crimes. She had just counted on nobody bothering to look. That was the real lesson, I thought. Most corruption persists not because it is well hidden, but because it is not challenged. People assume someone else is checking. Someone else is making sure things are done correctly. Someone else will speak up if something is wrong, but sometimes there is no someone else. Sometimes you have to be the person who asks the questions and demands the answers. I never regretted any of it. The stress, the late nights researching building codes, the confrontations, the vandalism, the legal threats. It had all been worth it to restore integrity to our community and to hold criminals accountable. Pine Ridge Mountain Estates was not perfect, no place is. But it was better now, fairer, more transparent, more democratic. And the homeowners knew they had the power to demand accountability from their leaders. On a clear day in early June, exactly 18 months after the icicle fine that started everything, I stood with Gary and about 30 other neighbors watching the groundbreaking for the new clubhouse. A legitimate contractor with proper insurance and licensing would build it. The county was already involved, reviewing plans and scheduling inspections. It would cost more than Patricia's version and take longer to complete, but it would be done right. "You should say something," Gary said, nudging me toward the temporary podium someone had set up. "This is your show. You are the president." "Yeah, but you are the reason we are here. Come on, just a few words." Reluctantly, I walked to the podium. Everyone turned to look at me expectantly. "I am not great at speeches," I started. "But I want to say that what happened here, what we all did together, matters. Not just for our neighborhood, but as an example. HOAs have a lot of power over our lives and our homes. That power can be used to help communities thrive, or it can be abused. We learned that the hard way." I paused, looking at the faces around me, people I had come to know and respect over the past year and a half. What we proved is that homeowners are not powerless. When leaders abuse their authority, we can hold them accountable. It takes work. It takes courage. It takes people willing to ask hard questions and demand honest answers. But it can be done. This new clubhouse represents a fresh start. Built honestly, transparently, with everyone's input. That is how it should have been done the first time. That is how we will do things going forward. There was applause, and I stepped away from the podium, relieved to be done. Gary took over, discussing the construction timeline and upcoming community events. As I walked back to my cabin after the ceremony, I felt a sense of closure. The fight was over. Justice had been served. The community was healing and moving forward. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I answered anyway. "Mr. Owens, this is Detective Sarah Chen with the Larimer County Sheriff's Office. I am investigating some similar fraud cases involving HOAs in northern Colorado. I was wondering if you might have time to talk about your experience with the Pine Ridge case." I smiled. "Sure, Detective. I would be happy to help, because that was the thing about standing up to corruption. Once you do it successfully, people notice. Other victims find courage. Other investigations get started. The impact spreads beyond just your own community." I did not know it at the time, but my conversation with Detective Chen would lead to investigations of 3 other HOA boards in Larimer County. 2 of those investigations would result in criminal charges. Dozens of homeowners would get justice because I had been willing to share what I learned. But that is a different story. For now, I was just Frank Owens, a civil engineer living in a cabin in the mountains. I had icicles on my roof every winter. I had good neighbors and a functional HOA. I had peace and quiet and a beautiful view. And I had learned that sometimes the best thing you can do is refuse to accept an unjust fine for icicles and see where that refusal takes you. Sometimes it takes you places you never expected. Sometimes it leads to uncovering fraud and corruption. Sometimes it changes an entire community for the better, all because of icicles. I never did get that $250 back, by the way. The fine had been paid before the board was removed, and technically, it had been a valid citation under the bylaws as they existed at the time, even if those bylaws were being selectively enforced. The new board offered to refund it, but I declined. I kept the receipt framed on my wall as a reminder that small injustices can reveal big problems, a reminder that asking questions is important. A reminder that one person really can make a difference. $250 well spent, I thought every time I looked at it. The mountains outside my window were eternal and unchanging. The community around me was stronger and better, and I had played a small part in making that happen. It was enough. More than enough. I poured another whiskey, sat in my rusty vintage camping chair on the porch, and watched the sunset paint the peaks gold and crimson. Life was good. Justice had been served. The icicles would return next winter and nobody would fine me for them. Sometimes the smallest victories are the sweetest ones.